Thank you so much for joining us for our third session of this parenting roadmap class about preparing for high school. We're really excited to also announce that this will be our last one online. So we will hopefully be having these sessions in person very soon. But thank you so much for joining us online as we have had these discussions. And please remember that if there are anything that we can follow up with, you can feel free to email me at matt@ccmcdermott.org, and we would love to interact further. But we're going to begin this session with a passage from James 3 that really speaks to the importance of our speech. And I know that every time I read this passage, it is convicting, but it is also just a really practical reminder of the importance of our speech. James 3, starting in verse 3, it says, "When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal." Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth can come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. James 3, verses 3 through 12. So if you can't tell by that, our common theme is going to be talking about speech. And when we talk about speech in today's world, we're not only talking about verbal speech, but, often that manifests itself in text messages or social media posts or GIFs or, different forms of communication, but they all fall under the general pattern of speech. And we have to, kind of think holistically about speech. But we want to start out with this idea of, how do we grow in our ability to listen to our teens, because they want to be heard, and how can we grow in our ability to listen?
I'm not sure our teens want to be heard. and I'm not a talker, so I'm going to let her talk.
I learned that it was important to kind of figure out their chatty time and let them have it. I used to be a night owl, and I am not anymore. And one of our kids would just, right at that moment that I was about to go to bed, would just magically appear out of nowhere, plop down on the couch, and be like, "This is the thing I got to tell you that happened in my video game." And I don't care about video games, but I learned that I need to let him tell me all his chatty, just whatever, because I'm going to learn something in that conversation about him. I'm going to learn about who he's playing video games with, or something that went down outside the video game. So let him ramble your ear off, even if you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's 11 o'clock." You know what I mean? Yes. Like, because those opportunities didn't happen all that often, and he would just show up and start talking, and I was like, okay, this is important. This is one-on-one time with my teenage boy, and eventually we might get to some stuff that I was actually really interested in if I let him just talk about all the weird random stuff that a 13 or 14-year-old might talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we had one of those late talkers too. But those conversations late at night were some of the best we ever had, So you're so right, Leslie. You gotta take advantage of it when they want to talk, and then just practically speaking, you need to give them your full attention. You've got to. And I'm speaking to myself, put my phone down, turn the TV off, put the computer away, and really give them your full attention. And sometimes, we're busy and it's so easy because, yeah, I'm listening, but you're not sending the message to them that you're truly listening. So, and another thing that I have thought about that I had to work on a lot was just letting them talk and not interrupting them, or not, I'd be thinking about what I wanted to say next, or I'd interrupt them with a question that would just pop in my mind that it was related to it, but it kind of interrupted their train of thought. So I think that was real important for me to learn to just close my mouth and open my ears and listen carefully.
I'm curious, you guys have 2 daughters and a son, right? Did they, in terms of volume of communication, did you find that they were very different? Like, was it the girls that would talk, or did everybody, you kind of had those conversations with all of them?
I feel like the girls will talk more just naturally, just in normal conversation. We would get more information, and our son was more of the late night talker, and
He had to initiate it.
Yes,
He would bottle it up and then
and then it would come out. Yes,
late at night.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because the one that the child that she was talking about is our oldest child, Brady. What about Mason? Because he wasn't part of those late night conversations. Mason's more of a talker, I guess. So he's
more open.
He's more open. He's more willing to chit chat about various things than Brady is. But yeah, I guess I just was just curious. Matt had kind of mentioned differences between boys and girls, kind of offline a second ago, and I was just curious as to how that played itself out in those communications.
I think go ahead, Mike.
One thing that Cindy has helped remind me of, listening isn't the same thing as agreeing. Sometimes you just need to listen and listen and listen and just be quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and dads out there, I don't know if you're like me, but that is hard. It's hard for me. I don't know. I'm afraid that they can see my eyes glazing over sometimes, and I have to talk to myself in my head, right? And remind myself, hey, this is important. This kid doesn't talk to me like this every day. Let's make sure we get the most out of it while he's willing to talk.
And if they're sharing a challenge, my mind immediately jumps, okay, how do I fix this? What can I do? If that's not the point, they just need to talk.
Yep, that's a very good point. Very good.
I think that's interesting and this is something that's come out in multiple of our different age group sessions about just that rhythm of when people talk. I think that's really interesting and something I've even noticed, like, after hearing somebody mention that about, I discount that, and I think even my own relationship with my wife, a lot of times she wants to talk a lot later at night than I do, right? And so, it just depends, and I think we do have to be very cognizant of being available during those times for sure. Now, a lot of these, just communication patterns in general can get interrupted by conflict, and, different things can come out of different principles apply to conflict, and then, different lessons will even be learned in conflict. But how do we approach, communicating during times of conflict with our teens?
I mean, our primary style was yelling, like a lot of it. No, I'll just play. Clearly, there are yelling times. Yeah, it's hard. A lot of those conversations can be real emotional. The child's doing something that you don't necessarily agree with, or, gosh, I don't know how many fights we had with one of our children about grades. And I hope he doesn't listen to this, but, well, actually, he's been through all these fights with us, so he knows what we're talking about. But, you can, when I was a kid, you couldn't see your grades online. Now you can log on and see all their grades and what's been turned in and what hasn't been turned in. And too often there was way too many things that hadn't been turned in. They were just zeros. And we had knockdown dragouts about that. And so I don't know what my advice is for parents on that kind of thing. There are some things that are going to be incredibly frustrating for you. That was one of the hot buttons for us, is you want your kids to succeed. You got intelligent kids that sometimes just don't put forth the effort to be successful. And that, for me in particular, drove me crazy like nothing else. So much so, you try to remain calm and have those conversations, and then the next week it's happening again. So I'm not advocating the yelling style. I'm just saying we're all human. We're all parents. We're trying to get through this the best way we can. Sometimes you lose your cool. And it's at those times when you realize you've lost your cool, it's probably really important to go back to the child and say, hey, I was frustrated. I screwed up. I approached it all wrong. I lost my temper. I apologize. And try to reopen some better communication and do it differently next time than you did that time.
I just wanted to add one comment to that regarding that specific thing, the grades. We discovered that I couldn't be the one that had those conversations. So whenever, like there's certain things that you might discover one parent needs to be the one that, because I was an overachiever. If I had an 89 in a class, that was the end of the world. I needed the A, so I can't even relate to being okay with like a D. Like that's just, I can't. So I would get too emotional in those conversations. So I made the decision in middle school that I wasn't looking at the grade book anymore. That was Alan's job. You know what I mean? Like it was just a parenting decision that it was breaking my relationship with him because I was mad all the time about that. And if I didn't have to be, like, he would start to have the conversation with me in the room, like, I'm leaving.
She would leave.
I don't want to know because I'm going to get mad and I don't want to be mad. So, because only one of us needs to be fussing at him about that. And I get to just, other things will be my responsibility.
I think it's good sometimes too to just keep the conflict in perspective. Is it something small or is it something that really needs to be addressed? And I'm not saying just to let them go wild, but be wary and choose your battles accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. One of the things that I told myself over and over again is don't sweat the small stuff. I'm not telling the kids that. I'm telling me that. Just to try to keep me from getting frustrated over something that at the end of the day is not that big of a deal, to your point. You've really got to pick your battles in order to be more effective.
If it's not something that's really affecting their love for God and their heart for God, it may still be important to deal with, but again, just keep it in perspective as to how important it really is and how far you need to take it. And sometimes it's okay to let them make a decision that is not going to turn out very well, and then let them deal with the consequences. Sometimes that's the best teacher of all, better than mom and dad saying, that's not going to work.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that's important.
absolutely.
Do you think, as your kids, kind of grew throughout the teenage years, did you see certain kind of patterns develop that you learned from in conflict? Or would you say that one of your kids has a conflict style that's different from others? Or I don't know. I mean, I feel like for me, when my parents used to get on to me, I became a win the argument kind of kid. That was my conflict style. My brother was more of a, hey, this really hurt my feelings, and so I'm going to react emotionally to it. So, I don't know, did you see any of those things with your kids, and did you have to recognize one or the other in the moments or anything like that?
Yeah, Mason is a fighter. He's he typically doesn't have great counter arguments, but he will argue it very emotionally and passionately, and sometimes with a lot of anger. Brady was just the opposite, at least in my perspective. You may have a different perspective. Brady wouldn't argue much at all, and would just kind of go brood, I think, and kind of hold it all in. So yeah, they were very different in that regard. Mason was the same way. He's an easy communicator, but he's also very argumentative. You kind of get the good with the bad when you get a communicator, right? He's going to communicate with you and tell you stuff and be open with you, but at the same time, he's going to be a fighter, and he's going to use this communication to try to shoot down all of your arguments and tell you how you're the one that's wrong and not him. Did you want to add to that? Okay.
We kind of want to transition to positive reinforcement, and that's kind of a buzz word or buzz phrase in some ways, but we all know that it is important, and this idea of encouragement and this idea of recognizing that things are hard. And man, this last 18 months in particular has been really hard on everybody. But what are some ways that you found were helpful ways to encourage your kids?
And I'm not sure this is exactly the train of thought that you have, but sometimes when they do something that is exactly what you wanted them to do, you don't say anything. And I try really hard to this day to remember, like, I thank you so much for doing that. Like, I know we've asked you to do that 10,000 times. I don't mention that. But thank you for actually bringing your trash down on trash day. I didn't ask you yet. You did it. Yes. Thank you. Just little stupid little things. Like, it doesn't even matter what it is. They did something that I wanted them to do. I try really hard to acknowledge that I can see that they're trying, because I feel like on some level they're only doing it because they want that. They want that positive feedback that they did it. Like stupid little things, just making a big deal about how much I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
One thing I tried to do, I wish I would have done better at it, was to put some encouragement in writing. I was involved in that Letters from Dad program for a while, and didn't keep up with it as well as I should have. But it really became a time of reflection, and really thought about what I wanted to write to each of them. And it'll be a keepsake, maybe if they haven't thrown it away, maybe they'll pull it out one of these days.
Don't ask.
I've thought about that so many times and have not done a good job at it. But I think what you said was correct. You have plenty of time to think about it, and you can really be thoughtful in addressing those things when you write it. Versus if I say it to him face to face, I'm going to lose half of what I want to say. Right. You know what I mean? Right. And I'll walk away from the conversation going, why didn't I say that? Why do I think about that after the conversation? So if you can sit down and write it out, you've got plenty. You can even go back and look at it several times.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That's
you can
so
start
important.
it a day later. Once you've thought about it some more, you can add more to it. And before you know it, you've said exactly what you wanted to say to your child on paper. And I think they have not thrown those away, I promise you. They have those somewhere in their possession.
And for you young families out there, it's not texting, it's actually pen and paper.
True. Ironically, I was just about to bring up texting. I love to text the boys just little I love yous, or I'm proud of you, or you did a great job today, or you just, especially like with Brady, because he's away at college, I love to send him little, just I'm proud of you. Thanks for working so hard.
Yes. And along with that too, I think teenagers sometimes focus more on what they aren't allowed to do rather than looking at, if you can point out their long-term goals and their progress toward those goals and how, they're doing those little things that are adding up to make them responsible adults and pointing that out to them and, on a regular basis as much as you can. I think that's real important to them. Absolutely.
I think one thing that we really wanted to talk about was, one of the can be a point of conflict with teens is the idea of time management, and we have so many different things pulling us in different directions, and as adults we have so many things pulling us in different directions as well. Do you have any thoughts about what are some helpful tips for helping our kids grow in that area, or maybe even recognizing that there may be some inevitable conflict that comes in that arena? Any kind of thoughts about time management?
Yeah, well, model it again, and then, as we were talking about before, figure out, their personalities and help them figure out what works best for them. We had one who, would come home straight from school, get that homework done, just wanted to check it off and be done with it. Another one needed more time, and maybe after dinner was a better time to get started on it. So you just have to help them figure out what works for them.
Yeah, we had a similar experience. Brady, we never had to talk about time management. I mean, maybe there was some little stuff, but for the most part, he kept his own schedule and he stuck to it, and we didn't have to worry about it. Mason was just the opposite. If we weren't constantly reminding stuff wouldn't happen. Actually, he surprised us a little bit, and I don't know if I mentioned this in a prior podcast, but he recently got a job, like last year. He's working at Scotty P's, that burger joint over there on 75. And when he first started there, I thought, okay, I'm not going to remind him, when do you have to be at work? Give me your schedule so I can make sure that you're on the road and plenty of time to get there in time. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I've done that all through his school career with the grades that we talked about earlier. I'm not going to do that with his job too. We're just going to let him sink or swim, kind of to your point earlier. And, it's going to be on him to manage that. And shockingly, the kid has managed that. I don't know that he's missed a shift. And I'm kind of watching, right? I'm not really saying anything, but I look out the window at about half an hour before his shift to make sure his car's gone. And it's always gone. And he's done a really good job managing his time with his job. And I guess that's because, I don't know why that is. Maybe school wasn't his priority, and that's why he didn't go out of his way to try to manage his time, and maybe his job is more important to him than that. I'm not sure, but I guess the good thing is it can change, and you may go from having a kid that can't manage his time at all, and when they get to doing something that they like or that they enjoy, suddenly things change, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's a journey. Again, it's a time management journey, right?
Man, when our kids were in high school, our rule was, you need to be involved in something. You don't care what it is, but you need to be involved in something. But I think there is a tendency to be overbooked and overscheduled. But we wanted them to be involved in one thing. So you just got to be mindful of too many requirements coming from too many different activities.
You guys were better than us at that. Man, there were times where they were in multiple sports simultaneously, playing basketball and baseball at the exact same time. And then we would get home and just complain about it, but didn't really make any changes, right? We're like, well, if they want to do this, I guess we'll try to help them manage it, but it's killing us as parents. So yeah, I think that's really good advice. Yeah, it's good advice. You definitely can and will get overwhelmed in today's world when there's so many opportunities to do so many different things. And if you don't find a way to make it more manageable, it's going to cause
A lot of stress,
trouble.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you guys can all speak to this in some ways, but I think, in a lot of these classes, and it's rightfully so, we always talk about the sports schedule being crazy, but all of you can speak to the fact that band's pretty busy too. That's one of the things, I never grew up in band, surprised me about being a youth ministry, but man, when they do their marching season and when they do their competition season, and all, it's busy. It
is.
It's a commitment for sure.
Yeah, I never did the band. I can kind of relate to I'm just like, really? Band? It takes that much time?
It's a lot of time.
Yeah, it takes way more than I ever would have thought before we were in band, for sure.
So when we talk about this topic, we can always think from it, I don't want to use the word secular in a bad way because it ultimately is spiritual, and that's what we're going to kind of focus on. But we could read a book like, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or whatever, or, get the latest time management software on our phones and different things. And all those are important and helpful things. But how do you think about this idea of being too busy or over pulled different directions from a spiritual perspective?
Well, I'll answer where I think you're going. So when I was at Texas A&M, in the AFC, one of the things they used to say when you showed up and wanted to be a part of the AFC is don't major in the AFC, because what you end up doing is flunking out of school. When you spend all your time doing the trips, spending time with the AFC, great things, very positive, very spiritually uplifting, but you can do too much, and other things in your life will suffer as a result. And I have no idea if that's what we're going for, but that's what came to mind.
Sure, and I think that's definitely a part of it. I think, kind of this idea of viewing maybe how each thing we have in our lives can be viewed from a spiritual perspective, right? But what other thoughts about this as a spiritual topic?
I think we've talked to them about how, just like money, the time that God has blessed you with, it has to be, you have to prioritize and you have to use it wisely. And whatever you spend most of your time on speaks very clearly about what your priorities are. And, and we have to work on that as well. It's always a struggle, I think, but important to remember.
Just in the last week, we had a conversation about the importance of spending time with other Christians. And I mean, man, did COVID throw a wrench in that.
Yeah.
So I think, there's habits that have been developed over the last year that have changed the way we spend our time. And it's like we really need to refocus and rethink because there's all these things that we're doing, but, how much time are we spending focusing on our spiritual life? Because we can get, especially kids that are involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, it's like, I've done all of this stuff until 6 o'clock at night. I've also got to do my homework. Wait a minute. What about worship on Wednesday night? There's just, and then there's this whole dilemma as a parent. Like, do I let him miss worship to do this 3-hour project? There's all of these things that come up, but having those conversations about how important it is to surround ourselves with other Christians. Because a lot of those activities won't necessarily, there may be Christians at those various activities, but it won't be the majority of your group most likely. So that's just a conversation that's kind of been ongoing.
Sure. Yeah, we have this silly illustration we'll do in high school class sometimes with Nerf guns, one that's the single shot and we'll put 3 bullets in it, and then one of those that shoots a whole bunch of them, we'll put the other 165, hours in a week and, kind of have them go against each other. And, it's amazing when you look at it like that, how our time can get so, skewed out of balance really, really fast. And not all things are bad that we're pursuing, but we can definitely always work to adopt a good perspective when pursuing those. And we talk about being around others and that speaks to us as adults as well, the importance of being in Christian community. How do you think about how you parent with other Christians, or how do you expose your kids to other positive adult influences? Any thoughts about the importance of that for our teenagers?
Well, we found life groups to be very, very impactful for our kids, just to hear other Christians, talking about their journeys. Course youth activities, their band activities, scouts, and then just the family friends that we, chose to, tended to gravitate toward other families, either within our congregation or within our community, who had similar values to ours, and felt like could uplift our kids as well. And I think we also look to people within the church that maybe were a step ahead of us, I'll call it Jeff and Pam Durham for one. Their kids were older than ours, and I can remember ours were younger. And we would look up to them, and we admired the way they raised their kids. And we would just kind of get advice from them. They may not have even realized it, but we were watching and listening carefully, and they were a very good positive influence for us, as many others are too. But
Well, that's a good thing to end on, finding somebody that might be one step ahead of you on the parenting life cycle and the journey, and seeking some mentorship or just watching. That's so important as a way to learn and grow. So we want to thank you so much for joining us again, and thank you for taking this time. I mean, we know that you took the time to stream this, and that was a commitment, and we hope that it was a blessing to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So thanks.